Everyone has a story they loved. Whether we discovered it on paper or the big screen, stories have a way of relating to us in just the right way. Because of this, many writers are often revered and loved for what they've produced. But some weren't recognized in their lifetime, some suffered through family deaths and alcoholism, and a few more died believing their life had been a failure. So today, I'm going to give you the stories of 12 classic writers who had a less than satisfying life. John Keats. Keats is a famous English romantic poet who thrived in England, but throughout his life his poems weren't well received by critics. As a medical student, his training took up much of his time to express himself in his poetry. During his life he was penniless, and after looking after his brother Tom, who died in 1818 of tuberculosis, John also died in 1821 aged only 25. During his last months in Rome, Keats wrote some of his most famous poetry, and after his death he became one of the greatest poets of all time. Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde is considered one of the greatest playwrights of all time, and is still remembered today for his novel The Picture of Dorian Gray. Despite being well received in 1895, when his play The Importance of Being Earnest had just been released, rumors of Wilde's secret life of being a homosexual were spreading. In the same year, the father of Wilde's secret lover, the Marquis of Queensberry, put Wilde on trial for homosexuality, what was then referred to as gross indecency. He was sent to prison, where his health suffered severely, leading him to develop meningitis and die penniless in 1900, aged 46. John Clare. Though not the most famous of the writers on this list, he was known as the peasant poet, and wrote about the beauty of nature and what effect mankind had on it. His first book of poems, Poems Descriptive of Rural Life, published in 1820, was generally well received, but despite going on to write 3 more poetry books, none of them received any recognition. Because of this, Clare struggled to make a living as a poet, and spent many years in poverty. Eventually he was admitted to a private asylum in 1837 for 4 years, and after leaving the asylum he walked 80 miles back to his home in 3 days, surviving on nothing but grass, which he claimed tasted like bread. Clare was then classed as insane by doctors, and was admitted to a lunatic asylum for 23 years until his death. Francis Scott Fitzgerald. Most people recognize this American novelist by his famous work The Great Gatsby, but during his lifetime this book, as well as over 150 of his other stories, didn't receive much recognition until his later years. In his early years, Fitzgerald struggled to survive and cope with the deterioration of his wife Zelda's mental health when Fitzgerald eventually died of a heart attack in 1940. It's been noted he considered himself a failure at the time of his death, despite the worldwide fame he has today. Edgar Allan Poe. Poe is well known for his short stories, including works such as The Telltale Heart and The Raven. He even has been named after an award and is considered the inventor of detective stories. But he didn't have a great start. In 1810, when he was 1, his father abandoned his family, and a year later his mother died of tuberculosis. When he was sent to live with a foster family, he was treated poorly and eventually disowned by the father. Even when Poe grew up, many of his closest family members, including his first wife and foster mother, died of tuberculosis. Eventually, in 1849, Poe was found on the streets completely delirious, aged 40. He was taken to the Washington Medical College for treatment, but he died. No one knows for sure what Edgar died of exactly, but speculations say this may have been epilepsy, cholera, or even tuberculosis. H.P. Lovecraft. Howard Phillips Lovecraft, or H.P. Lovecraft, is most known for his invention of Cthulhu, the Destroyer of Worlds, but also wrote many more influential horror stories. Unfortunately, Lovecraft's father became psychotic when he was only a few years old, and when Lovecraft was only 8 years old, his father died in 1898. Then, when his grandfather died in 1904, Lovecraft's family was forced to move into a shabby house, where Lovecraft himself was subject to nervous breakdowns. After his mother died, H.P. Lovecraft became an orphan and tried to make a living as a writer, but he only obtained limited readership. Due to poverty, the writer suffered from malnutrition regularly, and in 1937, H.P. Lovecraft died of cancer aged 46. Sylvia Plath. Plath was an American poet and writer born in 1932, who was known for her autobiographical novel, The Bell Jar, as well as a collection of poems. Unfortunately, Sylvia Plath's father, Otto Plath, died at the age of 8, only a week and a half after her birthday. For many years, Plath would also suffer from depression, and for most of her life she would attempt to commit suicide. She did happen to marry another famous writer, Ted Hughes, but some letters of Sylvia's suggest Hughes may have domestically abused his wife. Finally, after being separated from Hughes for 6 months, Plath was eventually found dead after sticking her head in an oven in 1963, aged 30. Tennessee Williams. The American playwright Thomas Lanier Williams III, or Tennessee Williams, became famous after his play The Glass Menagerie, but this play also revealed a harsh background the writer had. His father was an alcoholic, and as a child, Williams nearly died of diphtheria, or a swelling of the neck. He also had a sister, Rose, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and due to her condition, it is believed Tennessee Williams was influenced to be an alcoholic and drug user. This would eventually end up killing him in 1983, where Williams was found, aged 71, choked to death from inhaling a plastic cap from a drug bottle. Hans Christian Andersen. Though the name may not instantly be recognizable, Andersen was a Danish writer who wrote fairy tales such as The Little Mermaid and Thumbelina. For most of his life, Andersen fell in love with women who didn't want him, and because of this, as well as genetics and boredom, Hans Andersen suffered from depression. His main issue with finding love was that he was too shy, and he never did marry, but rather write to express his feelings of rejection. At age 70 in 1875, he died of a combination of liver cancer and a fatal injury after falling out of his bed. Ernest Hemingway. Ernest Hemingway was an American novelist who was most notable for his work The Old Man and the Sea, as well as having a cocky attitude. A friend of his, F. Scott Fitzgerald, once told him how to end another one of his books, A Farewell to Arms, and Hemingway responded briefly with Kiss My Ass. Despite his bright personality, Hemingway divorced 3 times during his life, after settling with a lady called Mary Welsh in 1946. As well as this, Hemingway suffered extremely through anthrax, malaria, skin cancer, pneumonia, diabetes, 2 plane crashes, a ruptured kidney, hepatitis, a ruptured spleen, a fractured skull, and a crushed vertebrae. In the end, however, Hemingway committed suicide in 1961, aged 61, after shooting himself with his favorite shotgun. Agatha Christie. The detective writer Agatha Christie was known for the creation of her characters Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple. Although she described her childhood life as a happy one, she suffered from depression due to being overworked as a writer. Her depression eventually led her to disappear, after being asked for a divorce by her first husband, Archibald Christie, in 1926. After 10 days, she was eventually found at a hotel, and after being remarried to Max Mallowan, she eventually died aged 85 in 1976 of natural causes. T.S. Eliot. Thomas Stearns Eliot, or T.S. Eliot, was a British writer who moved from the United States when he was 25, and wrote works such as The Wasteland and Murder in the Cathedral. He married a lady named Vivian Hay Wood in 1915, but for a lot of the marriage, Vivian suffered from depression and migraines, and constantly needed attention. This caused Eliot to turn to drinking and smoking, and this eventually caused him to die in 1965, aged 76, of a chronic obstructive pulmonary disease.